I'm going to start and just say hello to everybody who's sitting, who's standing. It's really great to be here. Thank you very much. Well, that wasn't an invitation for more, just a subtle invitation to come to your seats. So I'm really excited for the next half an hour, not actually half an hour, 28 minutes, to take a step back and to look at the culture that we are all swimming in as we do this work, the way that cultural mindsets undergird, inform, frequently challenge the work that everyone in this room is doing. And for the next 28 minutes that we have together, I really have two fairly simple and straightforward goals. The first of which is to be helpful. That's always a great goal to have. I hope that I can take the work that I do and my colleagues do at the Frameworks Institute, bring it into this room in a way that is helpful and adds some value and maybe a slightly different perspective to the work that you all do. The second goal, equally important, is to do that in a way that is humble. I do not do the work that you all do in this room. I don't have the expertise that you all have. I don't work on the issues that you all work on. I have like a very specific type of expertise that I'm going to try to bring in and do so in a way that's respectful to the work that you all do. So in a spirit of humble, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself. That's, you guys got it. The joke cue must be working here. So I am by training what's called a psychological anthropologist, or what my mother-in-law calls a psychoanthropologist. And I'm not sure she understands how funny that is, but I love it and the pride with which she says it every time that I hear it. So that means that I'm interested in and study culture and the way that it influences how we understand issues, how we make sense of messages, how we formulate and reach decisions. And I get to do that work with about 30 other folks at the Frameworks Institute, where we study the deep underlying cultural mindsets that people use to make sense of issues like climate change, criminal legal reform, immigration, structural racism, early childhood development. And we're also interested in the science of framing, so how the choices that we make and how we communicate information have the power, have the ability to shift those mindsets, to open new perspectives, to provide new space and invite people into conversations in which they can think about solutions in new ways. So I'm going to start today with the problem, the situation that I have spent the last 20 years of my life studying, trying to understand, and importantly for us today, trying to help people who are stuck in this conundrum find their way out. So if we are all honest in this room, each and every one of us has been in this position before, whether it's been in a professional setting or, as in my case, frequently a personal setting around the Thanksgiving room table, where you think you have the perfect way of talking about early childhood development. You try it out with two of your closest colleagues who are also deep experts on early childhood development, and it is great, right? What could go wrong when it goes out to normal people, right? People who don't live and eat and sleep and breathe our issues as we do all day, every day. And you find that when you do, that thing that was so gripping and resonant and moving and persuasive to you and your two closest colleagues isn't when you go out to people who aren't in your field. And one of two things happens. So first of all, that thing that was so gripping and passion-inducing lands flat, right? It doesn't have grip, doesn't have traction. It goes in one ear and out the other. Unfortunately, that's not the only thing that can happen. The other thing that can frequently happen is that thing which sends us running towards more supports for parents actually leads people in the exact opposite direction. More individual responsibility, more evaluation of people's deservingness. So I'm going to give you an example of what this looks like in living color, a very specific example. We work with a lot of folks who are in the early childhood and 2-gen space, and a lot of developmental scientists. This is a direct quote from a developmental scientist that we work with, no one in this room, who said that persistent stress, direct quote, can derail development and have negative long-term effects on health and well-being. So I said it was a direct quote. I've made one small editorial change. In the original quote, the word negative was deleterious. Made that change to be slightly less obvious and obnoxious in the point that I'm about to make. So for those of us in this room, for people who work with kids and family and study early childhood development, this is like really true. Like all the way through truthity, true, right? A lot of research, number of disciplines, long period of time that we know that this is the case. Unfortunately, for people who aren't in our field and hear messages like this, they frequently kind of say things that look and sound like this.
Life's hard. It's supposed to be hard. You know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You know, all the bad cliches you can think of. I mean, there's been people that have come from absolutely nothing to make it in whatever society's eyes deems success.
So I don't hear very well. I don't know if anybody had a problem hearing that on the kind of side of the street in Tucson, Arizona. So I'll just make it crystal clear. That which we just heard, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, was not the intended message when this expert opened his or her mouth to deliver this message. So something is going on between the intent, the delivery of the message, and how it's received, the effect that it has. And I won't leave you on the very edge of your seats for a second longer. That thing is culture, right? Culture, not in the Indiana Jones external artifact archaeology kind of culture, which is still what my parents think I do, but rather culture in terms of a set of shared understandings, of assumptions, of mental models, in this case, for the rest of the day, what we will call cultural mindsets. So understandings that we have with us that become active when we're presented with information, which shape, which filter the opinions, the attitudes, the things we say as a result. And so when we talk about these cultural mindsets for the rest of our time today, there are three features that are really important for us to have a shared understanding of. So first of all, these things are implicit, right? They work below the level of conscious consideration. We make assumptions about issues, we make assumptions about groups of people, we make assumptions about parents, about kids, about government, without knowing that we are making those assumptions. Second, these things matter greatly because they determine, they shape how we see the world and the decisions that we make in it. And last, but certainly not least, these mindsets have a powerful function in either legitimizing our current social structures, the way that we've set up our society, or problematizing those decisions that we've made and the way that we've set up our society. So I'm going to pivot now, and for the rest of the time, I'm going to talk about this project that we've been running at Framework since May 2020 called the Culture Change Project. And this project started early on in the pandemic and right after George Floyd's murder as a response to the folks in the field who we partner with and what we were seeing in the public discourse. And what we were seeing were a lot of questions, but also a lot of claims that culture was changing in deep and forever ways, that America was becoming less racist, that America was going to see the power of prevention and come to support public health in new and amazing ways. And you can tell from my tone that we were, as people who have studied culture for 20 years, we were dubious about these claims. And so we thought, rather than just sit there and be dubious, that these are questions that social science methods are actually well situated to provide some insight on, right? So we viewed these as a set of empirical questions. Are these deep fundamental mindsets that guide how people think about every issue that you all work on, are they changing? Importantly, how are they changing? Which issues are they changing? And for whom are they changing? And then the ultimate question for us, who, as an organization that tries to work in partnership and support advocacy organizations, people who are working to build public will for change, what are the implications of any changes that we're seeing at this level of mindset for the work that people are doing on the ground to advocate for new policies? So we deployed a set of methods that we use on our other projects, a monthly culture tracking survey that we use to get a sense of whether and how these deep cultural mindsets are changing, qualitative work that includes focus groups every other month, and a set of in-depth cultural mindsets, what anthropologists call cultural models interviews, that we've done every year since May 2020. And what I'm going to do today is tell you about three of the mindsets that we've had a very close eye on over the last 3 years. None of these will be groundbreaking or surprising to you. That my intent is not to advance these in a way that suggests that these are new things that we've come up with. These should all strike you in a depressing way as familiar. And so the first one is the cultural mindset of individualism. The idea that the world is the way that it is, that outcomes are the way that they are as an exclusive result of how hard people try. The decisions they make, their internal character, fortitude, will, grit, gumption, drive, all those things. Kind of classic John Wayne, Jay-Z bootstraps thinking, right? Now, the problem with this is not that it's categorically untrue, right? Individual willpower choices do have an effect on the world. But the problem is that if we think myopically, if we think exclusively in this perspective, there's a whole bunch of things that drop out of focus. Systems, resources, policies, neighborhoods, contexts, relationships, all the things that we also know matter in terms of kids and parents. Second, the cultural mindset of fatalism, the idea that the world is too messed up, that problems are too numerous, too dark, dire, and on fire for us to do anything about, and therefore people's inclination is to peace out and exit when they hear about yet another dire social problem that you are stacking on the pile of those that they know that exist, but that they don't know anything we can do about. And last, but certainly not least, most pernicious, most dangerous of all, the cultural mindset of otherism, the idea that the world consists of a series of us and them groups, the way in which we so easily enter into zero-sum thinking, where, and I'm using these pronouns very intentionally, any more for they and them, those people over there, by definition means less for me and my people over here. So we're going to talk about these three cultural mindsets for the rest of our time. It's important to say that we're not only tracking them at kind of like an abstract level, we're really interested in the way that they manifest, the way that people use them in thinking about a set of slightly more specific policy issues. So we're interested in how they intersect, how they shape thinking about racism, health, particularly health equity, the economy, economic justice, government, and democracy. So it's really important. I would be doing my field of anthropology a massive disservice if today all I presented was a gloomy picture of culture. It's really important to say that each of these mindsets has a counterbalancing mindset that exists in American culture. So just like there's individualism, that bootstraps thinking, there is a strain of American culture that we all have in us that we can kind of activate and think, which is the kind of what surrounds us, shapes us view of contextualism. There is an opposing mindset to fatalism, which is the sense of pragmatism, the possibility ahead of us, and progress. We know that this is a rich set of ideas and understandings that we have access to. And thank goodness, there is the countervailing mindset of collectivism, which is there to offset and counterbalance this really dominant sense of otherism that exists. So I'm going to tell you about one big trend that is coming out of the last 3 years of this project. I should say that there are also 15 other big trends, but 15 other big trends are not going to fit in the 14 minutes and 51 seconds that I have. So we're going to do one. And I actually think this is really important in the work that you all do. And I'm going to end with a set of connections kind of between this big trend and what I think this means for the work that all of you in this room and online are doing. So the big trend is that we are seeing in a way that we have not seen in the 20 years that we've been monitoring those mindsets, that we are seeing a shift in the balance between systems thinking, that kind of contextualism, what surrounds us shapes us, and individualism. I'm going to tell you 3 quick specific findings that support this general trend. So first of all, we see a rise, an increase in systems thinking. Importantly, it is uneven. It is uneven across issues, and it is uneven across demographic groups. So when we look at issues, we see a really interesting way that this trend differs. So when we look at racism, so here are 3 of the 5 issues that we're working on where these differences are really pronounced. So when you look at racism, on one side of this continuum, on the individualistic side, is what has been a dominant American way of thinking about racism, which is racism is interpersonal, this kind of individual animus, that racism exists in the hearts and minds of a few wicked individuals. Then there is the more structural side of this continuum, which is racism is built fundamentally into the structures, the policies, the laws, the institutions that shape and govern how society works. So when we started this work, we found that the position of the whole sample was heavily skewed towards this interpersonal perspective, right? This individual animist perspective. What we have seen over the last 3 years is that this has moved and shifted to a more balanced perspective. Now, I'm not saying that everyone has all of a sudden gotten like rah, change systems, dismantle structures, but there has been a shift and now a more balanced perspective whereby people can entertain both of these ideas about racism. When we look at the economy, we're interested in, on the individualism side, that bootstraps thinking that I talked about, and the sense that the economy is a force of nature, what we call naturalism. And on the system side, a sense that the economy is designed. Now, when we started this work, the position across the sample was, relatively in the middle. But interestingly, we've seen a pretty dramatic movement towards more of a perspective, an increased reliance, ability to access this idea that the economy is not some force of nature, but rather a design system. Now, this one is particularly interesting because we have seen the most movement on this kind of continuum. I don't know if people saw that. That took me about an hour and a half to make that stupid dot do that thing. So hopefully one person saw it. But really sensitive, and I think particularly sensitive to some of the things that we heard in the last panel about the effect of policy in shaping our lived reality and our kind of economic well-being. Now, if you work on health issues, the news gets decidedly less good at this point. Where we started this work, so on the individualism side is health individualism, that health is the product of the choices that you and you alone make. And on the structural perspective, the idea that kind of what surrounds us shapes our health and our well-being. So when we started, this dot was very far over towards that health individualism perspective. We saw about 2 years into the project an ever so slight slide towards this more systemic perspective. And over the last year, we have seen, unfortunately, this slide back to its starting place, right? I think this last one is really interesting, and I'd love, if people have questions or ideas after this, I'd love to talk about that, but we don't have time for that, so we're moving on. The other thing that's really remarkable in this work over the last 3 years is the dominance that we are seeing in terms of people's kind of invoking the system is rigged kind of thinking. So initially it came up at the intersection of politics and the economy, and now in recent conversations that we've had with folks around reproductive justice and the Dobbs decision, we're actually finding system is rigged thinking finding its way into all of those conversations. So here's the kind of core mindset. There are some people in power who are pulling the strings, designing systems, not quite sure about the system or how it works in ways that disadvantage, and the quotes are important here to kind of connote the fact that this is heavily racialized, the way that people talk about regular people. But what we see here is what I would call, this is not a fancy technical word, a Swiss cheese mindset, right? It is full of holes. And what we see is there's a hole in terms of who's kind of doing this manipulation, what system is being rigged, how, and what effect. And in a fascinating way in our focus groups, we have seen the same people, depending on how this mindset gets filled in, go in dramatically different directions. So the same person can have this progressive critique of corporations and the ultra wealthy, rigging the economy, which leads to a really kind of substantial critique around power and poverty. And in the next 5 minutes, fill that hole in the mindset with coastal elites and socialists in a way that leads to something that looks and sounds very much like replacement theory. So the implications here is this, as a Swiss cheese mindset, is incredibly powerful. Like, it is everywhere. It is top of mind, but heavily open to manipulation, and has a strong tendency to evoke that fatalism, that once people see the problem in the system, they assume that there's not a damn thing we can do about it, and they quickly disengage from the conversation. So the third finding is that we are seeing that systems thinking kind of specifically in how people think about problems and finding that it does not extend to the way that they think about solutions. So a great example is the way that people talk about racism. So when you ask people open-ended questions about racism in America, as I said before, the discussion is relatively balanced between that more systemic structural perspective and an individualistic perspective. When you shift and ask people to think about solutions, all that systemic thinking fades away and people get left with get the racist cops out, get the crooked judges out, and get the racist politicians out. So a very individualistic focus. And what I think this means is that we know that when people have robust ways of thinking about cause, bootstraps, individualism, they get very easily to a set of solutions. Well, of course we should have work requirements on these policies. However, when people's causal thinking is kind of more extant and forming, weaker, it's much more difficult for people to kind of map that on and get to solutions. So I think what's going on is this is a sign that this balance of systemic and individualistic thinking is in flux. And I think this speaks in a slightly critical way to our practices in being preoccupied with problems. When you think about the way that structural racism has been communicated over the last 3 years, an inordinate amount of that time, I'm not being totally critical here, has been spent on the problem. Less time, to a considerable degree, has been spent on the solutions. So I think where we're at in terms of these overarching findings are, first of all, as dubious as I was at the beginning, culture is changing. And there are some of these changes that present space for us to think about new solutions, to think in new ways about new solutions. However, there are a set of issues that we are not seeing moving, health, for example, and I think a set of practices, this perpetual preoccupation with the problem, that are holding us back. So what I want to do for my last 6 minutes is try to connect this overarching research with some recommendations and ideas that you might think about in your work as you go out and communicate in persuasive and effective ways and move and build public support and demand for the policies, the interventions, and the practices that you know are so important in improving the lives of children and families. And so the first of which is that the economy, with that sensitivity that I showed, remember that dot that was moving around there, I think suggests the importance of focusing our efforts in communicating about the economy, that people's mindsets about the economy are fluid and heavily attuned to how issues are being communicated and the policies that are in play. Second, I think there is a major opening to advance systemic messages about racism, and importantly, its effects on kids and families, right? So what this means is making clear the way that structural racism affects the context, the surroundings, the lives of families, and how those effects, as Phil was talking about, kind of cascade into effects on the well-being of parents and kids. I think there's a whole debate kind of in our organization and out about the way in which that Swiss cheese model of the system is rigged narrative suggests that we should give it up, that it has the potential to go in some very kind of right-wing populist directions. But I would argue that because of the cultural power, because of the resonance of this mindset, our focus needs to be on finding ways to use it that send people, that channel people's attention in the direction that we want to go towards the things that we want people to be critical of in terms of economic power, and that we need to find ways that kind of evoke this mindset and that provide it with some integrity and resilience such that folks who would kind of use it in a totally different direction can't make that pivot, can't make that spin. Next, I think the importance of kind of moving, as I've said, from messaging that is really focused on the problem to providing a more balanced set of messages that focus on solutions, things that can be done to change systems, examples of how they improve the lives of kids and families are so important. And this is not just coming out of the Culture Change Project. There is a rich history of research that shows the power of this balance. So what this research shows is it's interested in the sense of urgency that messages have, like how bad a situation is, balanced with a sense of what's called efficacy, the extent to which people can see the problem as solvable. So the cell of this matrix here, where most of our communications live, is in the bottom left-hand corner. So all problem, 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 example of problem, data about problem, story about problem, more data about problem, maybe a little solution at the end, yields a very predictable result, which is that fatalism. Like, that is one of the most powerful invitations to crank up the dial when it comes to people's fatalistic thinking, which is not where we want people to be when we're trying to convince them to come in and along with us on solutions. Unfortunately, the answer is not just to switch that script and get all hopey changey woo-woo solutions are everywhere, because when we do that, the result is low motivation, snore and bore. People know that there are big, bad social problems out there. If yours doesn't seem like one of them, they're not with you. So there is this kind of magic combination when it comes to these ideas of urgency and efficacy, where we're able to evoke a strong sense that this is a problem, a real problem with gravity and urgency, but to be able to counterbalance that with an equally robust sense of solutions, that there are things that can be done, and when we do them, things get better. And when we're able to achieve that balance, we create these kind of magically persuasive messages that bring people in with that grip and traction of urgency, but give them a place to go in terms of our advocacy. So the final recommendation is really to focus on cueing those collective mindsets and also avoiding falling into the many and numerous traps that are out there when we talk that evoke that otherism. And I'm going to end, I should say, well, I can make these slides available. I love it when people take pictures of my slides, but I can definitely make these available. So this is an experiment that we ran with the Harvard Center on the Developing Child and the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child, which was designed to help people think more productively about child mental health, to get people to see that child mental health is real, like young kids can have mental health, and to be supportive of policies and practices that support that mental health. So the way that this works, this is a 6,000 person experiment selected to be nationally representative of all the demographic categories that you're thinking of. Each of those 6,000 people get randomly assigned to read about 80 words about a child mental health program. And the only thing that differs is the first sentence that they receive. So you log on, you get randomly assigned to the collective progress and social prosperity treatment message. So you read those 80 words, but the top sentence is, we need to do a better job of addressing children's mental health because, we didn't say it in such a cliched way, children are our future, right? Their healthy development, their solid, stable mental health are key to our ability to move forward as a country. Shelley, you log on, you get the value of vulnerability, same 80 words except for the first sentence. So your first sentence is, we need to do a better job of addressing child mental health in this country because children are our most vulnerable citizens and individuals. They deserve our empathy, our compassion, and our help. We must do better by them. You log on, I'm sorry, you get nothing. You're the control condition. You are the zero line on my slide, I'm sorry. And then we ask everybody the same set of questions designed to measure how supportive people are of a set of 15 evidence-based policies. So what you're going to see on the next click are what I think are two gorgeous green bars are going to appear on that screen. Those bars are going to show you is the extent to which hearing just that one sentence affects people's support for the policies. So quick stats lesson, up is good and down is not good. So you see that value of collective progress and social prosperity is boosting people's support. It's making people more willing to demand those policies. The value of vulnerability is having the opposite effect, right? So to translate that, if you're an expert or an advocate working on child mental health, and you are consistently using the value of vulnerability to frame your messages, you are not only wasting your valuable communications, resources, and real estate, you are using it in a way that directly disadvantages your goals as experts, researchers, and advocates. So I will end there with my new favorite quote. I haven't seen anybody use this quote from Heather McGreen before, but if you have, please let me know. I think in a very short sentence, this embodies everything that I've just talked to you about, which is everything we believe comes from a story we've been told. Thank you very much.